On this week's MMA and wrestling edition of My Take Radio, we got Bellator 172, this past weekend's UFC event, the return of GSP, and much more. On the wrestling side of things, of course, we got Raw, SmackDown, 205 Live, and all the newsworthy happenings in the world of professional wrestling. The MMA and wrestling edition of My Take Radio starts right now.
This coverage is live and uncensored, so if you have any small children present, you may want to have them leave the room.
What's going on, guys? My Take Radio episode 398, powered by Rageworks. I'm your host, Rich, and you are checking out the MMA and wrestling edition of the show. We release 2 shows per week, one MMA and wrestling focused, the second gaming and entertainment focused. If this is your first time tuning in, I want to say thank you for checking it out. I'm going to share my thoughts on what happens or what goes on in the world of MMA and professional wrestling. We've been doing it on a weekly basis now for 398 episodes. And if you want to get familiar and this is your first time tuning in, I invite you to check out some of our earlier episodes. We have professional wrestlers, mixed martial artists on. Plus, we usually have crowd interaction based on some of our live broadcasts. But now, since switching back to podcast, it's a little less stringent in terms of just being shackled to the live format. So thank you guys for hitting play and downloading it. And with that, let's get into some housekeeping for this week. First and foremost, as many of you know, if you've been following us on social media, Rageworks was at Toy Fair 2017. Myself and the rest of the Rageworks team were covering the entire event from Saturday through this past Monday, President's Day. We ended up taking Tuesday off just because it's a very, very exhausting event. Lots of running around, lots of photos, lots of videos. You guys can check all that on rageworks.net. If you're a WWE fan, there was a ton of great WWE merch from Mattel that we got to check out, and photos for that are in a separate post that we did on rageworks.net. They're going to be releasing new figures for WWE Zombies, also a brand new NXT line, and also some expanded additions to the WWE Mutants line as well, plus a ton of other stuff. So definitely check out our write-up for the new WWE line from Mattel. In addition to that, I always want to remind you guys that My Take Radio is not the only show on the Rageworks Podcast Network. We have a ton of great shows covering a bunch of different things, including TRSS, Black is the New Black, and of course, The Variant Issue. And for something a little bit more broad, we definitely invite you to check out Call Me When It's Over with Josie's Boy. Definitely something that is a far departure from the norm, but definitely with Tony's artistic stylings gives you guys something special and unique. So we have something for everybody on the Rageworks Network, and as always, I invite you guys to check out all of the shows besides MTR, of course, which you're listening to now. All right. So it's been a pretty quiet week outside of that. Had a little bit of some personal stuff going on. Had one of my cats pass away this past Monday. Kind of sucked. I had him for 15 years. Ended up getting a tumor in his throat and, took him to the vet. And the vet was like, listen, can't take it out. Got to just make him as comfortable as possible. And that's it. So I pretty much went from, I'd say 2 weeks after we took him to the vet, give or take, until this past Monday that he passed away. It was definitely very rough for many people in my house, myself included. It was the first pet that me and my wife owned while we were dating. So pretty much the amount of time that we were dating and have been married, we've had that cat as a pet. So, definitely a rough start to the week, but, definitely something that played a part in how I approached this week. Aside from that, though, business as usual. We got episode 400 live next week, March 1st, 11:30 p.m. Eastern, 8:30 p.m. Pacific. You're going to be heading to mtrlive.com. We're going to have live audio, live video. We're going to have the show chat in full effect. And of course, you are welcome to call in and share your thoughts on any of the stuff we talk about for that episode, whether it be MMA or wrestling. So please, if you're a fan of the show and you want to be involved in a live broadcast, you're going to join us March 1st at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, 8:30 p.m. Pacific for a special live MMA and wrestling edition of My Take Radio. And of course, it will be our 400th episode. So with that, that's going to wrap up the housekeeping. Let us get into this weekend. Oh, well, let me rephrase that. Let's get into this week's MMA, shall we? It was a busy week in the world of MMA this past weekend, with Bellator and the UFC having two very, very solid cards for very, very different reasons. Bellator 172 is what we'll kick things off with. As many of you know, all of us were excited to see the last Emperor, Fedor Emelianenko, make his return to the cage and his Bellator debut against Matt Mitrione. Later on, we would find out that fight was not happening as a result of some health issues that Mitrione was experiencing that I'll get into later on in the moment, which threw the card in complete disarray. As I was monitoring social media throughout the day, I kept hearing rumblings that the fight was off, the fight was on, the fight was off, the fight was on. And when it all was said and done, unfortunately, the fight did not happen. And Matt Mitrione had to be hospitalized. And it's unfortunate, but the card did go on, and there were still some solid fights. One of the other fights that I was keeping an eye on was the Bellator debut of Josh Koscheck, who was coming in taking on Mauricio Alonso. Now, it's been a rough road for Koscheck on his return back to the cage. He's been dealing with a ton of injuries. He's not getting any younger. He's been trying to get into the cage for the longest time and just kept getting derailed. We were looking forward to seeing him square off against Paul Daly and various other fights, but when it was all said and done, Koscheck made his way to the cage to face Mauricio Alonso, and unfortunately, it was not the debut that Koscheck was hoping for, as he was dispatched by Mauricio Alonso via TKO in the first round. It was interesting, too, because, it was a lot of back and forth. Koscheck was using a lot of open palm to gauge his distance, and Mauricio Alonso definitely was really, really taking it to him. And the hardest part was Koscheck he kept palming and palming, trying to close the distance, but he just wasn't able to get any sort of momentum going into it. And it was pretty much it. Alonso stunned Koscheck with a right, and then as Koscheck was backing up to the cage, he got cracked again, and he actually covered his eye as he fell to the floor. And it's interesting because I think that might have been the eye that had the orbital bone broken by GSP back in 2010. Not 100% sure if that was the case, but he definitely did grab the area around his eye as he went down. It's unfortunate. This is Koscheck's sixth consecutive loss. Not sure where he goes from here. Many of us were hoping to see, just see him fare well. I mean, I've never had any ill will towards Josh Koscheck. I've always felt that he was an interesting character, a guy to keep an eye on, especially in the early goings. And he fared well. He started kind of rounding out his toolkit, but I've always felt that by the time he finally hit his stride, the sport had evolved so much that he was being taken out by a lot of guys who just had a more well-rounded set of tools in their arsenal. Now, coming into Bellator, of course, I have always felt that he was brought into Bellator just to get that Semtex rematch, which I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case, only because that's the fight that everybody would tune in for, just to see him and Paul Daly square off once again and to see if the result would be the same. I know a lot of people that dislike Josh Koscheck would just love to see that fight strictly on the merit of Paul Daly rearranging his face. I'd be curious just to see it because there's some bad blood there, and I feel that the build-up alone just makes it an interesting fight to keep an eye on. Now, Josh Thompson and Patricky Pitbull were scheduled to square off. They were originally going to be the co-main and ended up becoming the main event for that card. Josh Thompson coming over from the UFC, Strikeforce veteran, taking on Patricky Pitbull, and it was all Pitbull from the first round all the way through as he dispatched Josh Thompson via KO. It was nasty. It really was. In the second round, Pitbull opened up with smart with the leg kicks, and he had initially dropped Thompson early on. Thompson popped back up, but then he just hit him with a massive uppercut as Josh Thompson was shooting in for the takedown. Thompson flattened out, and it was a wrap at that point. Pitbull just got some academic strikes in there. It was a beautiful finish. It's interesting though, because when you watch the replay for the fight, you see that the first knockdown of the round was because of a headbutt, then a left hand. But even though that was the case, the end result was still the same, with Pitbull securing the KO at 40 seconds in the second round. It was, again, a very good fight. I was also looking forward to seeing the Czech Congo fight, and I watched it. I flipped back and forth between channels, and it was only just because the fight was very plotting. The crowd was definitely not into it, and it's a shame. I've always felt Czech Congo's another one of those guys that needs one or two really good performances to really get him, to really get the fans behind him. Unfortunately, this performance was not the one. Even though we lost the Fedor Mitrione main event, the Bellator card for all intents and purposes was pretty solid. I enjoyed it. As always, Bellator brings something fun to the stage, and that definitely was the case this past weekend. Now, following that, we had the UFC Fight Night 105 card, which had some pretty solid fights. We had Hector Lombard in there. We had Travis Brown fighting. And as usual, not trying to go through the entire card like I've tried to do, just because you guys know most of the stuff, but I want to share my thoughts on some of the fights I enjoyed. Carla Esparza, Cookie Monster, back in there, taking on Ronda Marcos. A lot of really good wrestling from Cookie Monster, but unfortunately it didn't do her any good as Ronda Marcos secured victory via split decision. It was a good round. I definitely feel that Marcos had plenty in her toolbox to keep Carla Esparza from going too crazy with the wrestling, but Esparza definitely showed a lot of really good technique in that fight. Ronda Marcos just ended up being the better fighter on that night. Aside from that, I felt that it was a solid fight from both ladies. I really enjoyed it. The other fight I did want to talk about was, and this fight was crazy, the Sarah McMahon Gina Masny fight, which Sarah McMahon ranked number 7 in the bantamweight division, usually known for really durable, bloody fights at stand up. Definitely showed a little, something new in her toolbox with a beautiful arm triangle choke in the first round to dispatch Gina Masny. It was really well done. And what ended up happening was, obviously, she ended up using a rear waist lock to get her down. And at that point, she had secured back position, and then she transitioned from back position to mount, and it was pretty much academic. She locked in that arm triangle in the blink of an eye, and she had just an awesome squeeze to put in there to dispatch Gina Masny. It was really well done. I was thoroughly impressed with that. That's for sure. The other fight that I really enjoyed, and this fight was, I was unsure about how it would go, was the Johnny Hendricks Hector Lombard fight. Of course, Johnny Hendricks making his I want to say it is his first middleweight fight. I want to say, obviously Johnny Hendricks has been plagued with weight cutting issues, taking on a very dangerous Hector Lombard. And we got to see some good stuff out of Johnny Hendricks. He really showed that 185 might be the right weight for him. I think Lombard, of course, is a gamer. The guy is no slouch by any stretch. I know a lot of people have written him off based on previous performances, but I feel that Lombard definitely still poses a threat at middleweight. And Johnny Hendricks looked good. He looked comfortable. He looked really relaxed in there. And he started really working and getting comfortable in the second round, where he started working, a variety of strikes. He started working the jab. And then in the third round, there was a little bit, he started to get a bit more aggressive. A lot of people felt that, Lombard definitely could have had the first round. I think it could have gone either way. Lombard definitely looked better in the first round. So I would have rather have gone with the split decision versus unanimous based on just Lombard's performance in that first round. But like I always say, never let it go to the judges. Now, your main event, the big one, Derek Lewis, ranked number 8, taking on Mr. Ronda Rousey, Travis Browne. And man, what a freaking crazy fight. Travis Browne is a guy that many people have been watching closely. He was a prospect, always looked at as a guy that was 1 or 2 fights away from title contention. After becoming involved with Ronda Rousey, he started training with Edmund and that camp, and everybody feels that his career has just taken a tumble since then. Derek Lewis added to that by dispatching him with a beautiful knockout in the second round. It was nasty. It was really, really nasty. And honestly, if you look at the replay, you'll think that stoppage was definitely a lot later than it should have been. I mean, Travis Browne definitely took some shots that he did not need to take. Derek Lewis was a beast, that's for sure. He was an animal. Definitely a guy that has massive, massive jaw-shattering power, and he showed it in that fight. Travis Browne is no slouch in the heavyweight division, and to just get taken apart like that, it was nasty. He tried to work some offense in, tried to use the clinch game, but once he got wobbled in that second round, Derek Lewis went in for blood, and that was it. He was hammering rights on him, and he was out. If you see the replay, you'll be like, wow, that guy's out for the count. And it was a genuinely awesome performance. I felt that Fight Night 105 was, 50-50. It had good moments, and then it had moments where it kind of just made you want to change the channel, which I ended up doing. I had to end up watching some of the fights once again, later on in the week. And for me, I think that when you compare the two, I felt Bellator had a more exciting card. I felt that the UFC had a more balanced card. In other words, you had good performances coupled with some performances that were meh. But the Bellator card, even losing the main event, was exciting. I really enjoyed a lot of those performances. There were a lot of guys that went in there and left it all in the cage. Not that they're not doing it like that in the UFC, but I just feel that, guys like Derek Lewis are starting to really gain traction. People are digging him. I felt that he's definitely a personality. He's good. He's good on the mic. He has good presence, and he's a guy to keep an eye on in the heavyweight division. That's for sure. All right, switching gears into the news for, on the MMA side, there were a couple of interesting news items I did want to get into. First off, fight bonuses from UFC Fight Night 105. Derek Lewis and Travis Browne got the fight of the night bonus, which was good, well deserved. And Paul Felder and Thiago Moreta took performance of the night, $50,000 apiece. Now, on the Bellator side of things, as I said, Matt Mitrione had to withdraw from the card. He was hospitalized. It turns out after an interview conducted by MMA Junkie with Bellator president Scott Coker, we got some more information about it. Matt Mitrione, it turns out, woke up. He had excruciating pain. He was taken to the hospital. They had done a bunch of tests, and it turns out that he actually had a kidney stone. And, he was trying to pass the stone. He was in excruciating pain. And for, obviously his safety and health above all, they ended up scrapping the fight. But I mean, it's a legitimate gripe, man. I know a couple of guys personally that have suffered from kidney stones, and trying to pass a stone is a brutal, brutal, brutal affair. I pray I never ever have to endure that, because I've known just tough motherfuckers that they're just crippled, completely and utterly crippled by that entire experience. I wish Mitrione the best. It's a shame that, it happened right before this fight. Some people say that it's fate, that, his body saved him from Fedor taking a few years off of his life. obviously in jest, it's a funny way to look at it, but that's no joke, and I wish him a speedy recovery. He also said that Tito Ortiz and Chael were actually both offering to replace Mitrione, which was crazy. Scott Coker said he got calls from Chael saying, "Put me in, coach." Tito texted him, same thing, "Put me in." And he said it. He's like, "We just can't do that. It's not that simple." And they had run out of time. He said the doors were opening at 3:00 and they had to decide whether they were going to pull it or not. And, they ran out of time, but it looks like we may be seeing Fedor fight later on this year. Coker said that he is going to reschedule. It's just a matter of working things out. But, he said it's all the thing that's questionable now is whether he fights Matt or not, depending obviously on Matt Mitrione's health at any time. But he did go on to say that it has to be special because anytime Fedor fights, it's a big, big, big thing. And I agree. I mean, as much as people feel that Fedor is, manufactured hype or his career is full of cans, I stand by the assessment that I have stood by before, and that is the fact that Fedor fought in MMA in pride when you had some of the most dangerous individuals walking this planet. We're talking about guys like Mirko Krokop, Rampage, Vanderlei Silva, Vitor, the list goes on of just dangerous guys. Sakuraba, I could name a laundry list of guys that could pretty much dismantle most UFC fighters during that time period. And the fact is that I'm not begrudging those guys, but as a fan, I'm always bothered by people's revisionist history. Yes, did Fedor fight a couple of questionable guys? Sure. But amongst the guys that he did fight, he fought some of the best first ballot Hall of Famers in the sport when they were at the top of their game, period. We're talking about a guy who got dropped on his dome by a prime Kevin Randleman, survived to secure the victory. Kevin Randleman, rest in peace, was a guy that you saw him and you'd be like, listen, I don't even want to get a hug from that person. Randleman was a beast. Mirko Krokop is 1000% a killer. Even now, as old as he is, he'll still dismantle most dudes. And that's something that for Fedor, I feel that he deserves the respect. He deserves the accolades. But I also feel he's in a situation, much like I've said, with guys like Anderson Silva, GSP, the guys that are always going to put asses in seats. These guys now, they're taking the big money fights, the payday fights, and they're not really trying to go in there. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're going to give guys an opportunity, and that's great. I mean, him fighting Mitrione, I love Fedor. I thought Fedor had pretty much, I'd want to say an 80% shot, but Mitrione did have a puncher's chance, and I got to respect that too. So we'll see what happens. Whether we see Fedor fight later on in 2017 or towards the tail end of 2017 is anyone's guess, but I guarantee you whoever he fights, people are going to tune in, period. I wouldn't mind seeing him and Rampage fight a heavyweight. I know Rampage has that fight with King Mo and everybody's all like, yeah, King Mo, Rampage. It's nonsense. I would love to see Rampage go in there and fight Fedor. I think it would light a fire under Rampage's ass. I think he has the tools to go out there and put on a good performance. And I definitely think that putting two guys like that in the cage is bound to give us something special. But again, what do I know? Anyway, moving on, there were some interesting changes to the with regards to how the UFC and the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency are handling regulations. Both companies are actually revising some of their policies, which are scheduled to go into effect on April 1st. And both of them will make it easy for new or released fighters to return, but it will also make it tougher for those who come out of retirement, i.e. Brock Lesnar. The new guidelines will require fighters who are released from the UFC to be available for 1 month's worth of testing, as will new fighters, but that the rule can be waived for returning fighters in the case where they return as an injury replacement. Meanwhile, according to the statement that was released, fighters returning from retirement must be part of the testing pool for 6 months with written intent to return filed with the USADA. Athletes with an established and verifiable history of performance-enhancing drug use may be required by the USADA to submit 2 clean drug tests during that time. The 6 months can be waived by the USADA in exceptional circumstances or where the strict application of that rule would be manifestly unfair to an athlete. You know, this is definitely something that is 100%, in my opinion, being done because of the situation with Brock Lesnar. The Brock Lesnar situation was very, very, it was a blemish for the sport. It was a blemish for Brock, and it was obviously something that rattled Mark Hunt's cage and ruffled his feathers in regards to his relationship with the UFC. You know, Brock Lesnar tested positive for 2 tests with regards to his fight at UFC 200, and he had a 4-month requirement for the testing pool waived, and obviously since then he has retired. And it's crazy because I think this is a good way to curb some of this stuff, but it's still something that you have to keep an eye on. I mean, I think anybody who's coming out of retirement definitely needs to be part of the testing pool prior. As for, you know, the exception for people coming in as an injury replacement, you know, it's a little bit of a gray area, but these guys are taking a risk also coming in and subbing on very, very short notice. Well, the USADA and the UFC obviously are revising their drug policies and their testing protocols. But one thing that came out of it this week that the USADA announced was that Cris Cyborg, who was flagged for violating, for a potential anti-doping violation, was actually cleared, which is crazy. Both the UFC and the USADA announced that Cris Cyborg had been cleared, stemming from a December out-of-competition drug test. Additionally, she was granted a retroactive therapeutic use exemption, and she will not receive any penalty or sanction for the anti-doping violation. As many of you know, she had been flagged for failing a drug test, and it was found that she had, I'm probably going to ruin this medicine's name, spironolactone, for out-of-competition drug testing that was conducted in December. The substance is prohibited under the diuretics and masking agents, portion of the doping guidelines, and prohibited at all times under the UFC anti-doping policy. Now, to Cris Cyborg's credit, she identified the substance as a medication that was prescribed to her by her physician for a treatment due to an endocrine disorder that she has. The USADA conducted a thorough investigation, and they actually spoke to her doctor. And the thing is that even though they flagged her for it and told her that she needed to have a therapeutic use exemption, Cyborg applied for the therapeutic use exemption to authorize the substance and received it with retroactive effect after obviously due diligence was conducted by the USADA and the UFC, and they determined that she was allowed to utilize this medication since it was part of something that was prescribed by her doctor. And above all, she was upfront with it, and they actually interviewed her doctors, etc., etc., etc. Now, obviously, the therapeutic use exemption is something that a lot of people have always kind of looked at with the side eye, because obviously guys have come in and they've used it for TRT, etc. But in this case, it is for, an endocrine disorder. So, in order for athletes now to receive a therapeutic use exemption, they have to receive approval and submit medical records demonstrating a verifiable medical diagnosis as well as legitimate medical need for the requested medication. And this is all in part of, applicable via the WADA guidelines. In addition to that, 2 members of the USADA's independent therapeutic use exemption committee must individually review the application and make the recommendation of whether it should be granted or denied. Now, in Cyborg's case, the therapeutic use exemption was granted because the athlete has, a complete medically verifiable condition. And the thing is that the medication that she was prescribed that contains the substance she was flagged for is the appropriate standard medication for that type of illness. the doctors and, after research, they determined that the doctors and her medical team tried other ways to find ways to treat her condition. But unfortunately, that was the only medicine that was capable of helping with her condition. So it's interesting how this how this has turned around so quickly. And, her suspension was lifted, and her positive test will not result in any sort of a violation. Now, one thing though, now that she has the therapeutic use exemption, Cyborg will be required to continue to document her medical care and must apply for that therapeutic use exemption in advance of the expiration of the one that is currently in place if she wishes to remain compliant with what the UFC's anti-doping guidelines are. Now, the beauty of this is, and this is where this long-winded medical diatribe is going, is that now Cris Cyborg is free and clear to fight in the UFC's featherweight division, meaning that she is capable and willing and capable of challenging Germaine de Randamie for the women's featherweight title should the UFC decide to proceed in that direction. Germaine de Randamie, of course, defeated Holly Holm in what many viewed as a very controversial fight, and she has gone on record as saying that she would be willing to give Holly Holm a rematch. But we all know the UFC and MMA math dictates that the quickest title opportunity is going to come to the person who puts the most zeros in Dana White's bank account. And I got to say that Cris Cyborg definitely has all the tools to make that possible. So we'll see what happens. We're going to be monitoring this story very, very, very carefully. In other news, UFC 209 has officially been finalized. That goes down March 4th. Champ Tyron Woodley will be giving the rematch to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson for the welterweight title. The interim lightweight title will be up for grabs as Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov square off in the co-main. Of course, the winner of that has a date with Conor McGregor when he decides to come back. Rashad Evans is also on that card, and the opener for the pay-per-view will be Mark Hunt taking on Alistair Overeem. So definitely a solid card for sure. Todd Duffy was also supposed to be fighting on that card. He was supposed to take on Mark Godbeer, but unfortunately Duffy was forced off the card, and a new fighter, Daniel Spitz, who is a UFC newcomer, will be stepping in to face Godbeer on obviously short notice. UFC 209 once again March 4th, pay-per-view for the main card, prelims on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1. Another card that started to take some shape is UFC 211, where Joanna Jędrzejczyk, finally figured out how to pronounce her name, will be defending her strawweight title against Jessica Andrade. Also, Stipe Miocic, Junior Dos Santos for the UFC heavyweight title will be on that card, as will Ben Rothwell and Fabricio Verdum. So definitely a solid card already taking shape in May. That's going to be going down at the American Airlines Center in Dallas. Once that fight card takes additional shape, we will share it with you guys. Now, the last bit of MMA news to wrap things up. Many of us have been wondering what's going on with Ronda Rousey, and even though her fight career remains uncertain, she is starting to get some media attention once again, so much so that she will actually be involved in an episode of Blind Spot. Blind Spot is currently on NBC. I've been watching that show since it started, and basically the character of the show, played by the young lady who played the Lady Sif in Thor. Damn. Her name escapes me. I apologize. You guys know who it is. IMDb it. In any case, basically her body is covered head to toe in tattoos, and those tattoos lead to different clues and different things to solve various, stop various terrorist attacks or crimes, etc. It's a pretty solid show. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's good. It's good filler TV. On a weeknight. In any case, Ronda Rousey is going to be appearing in that show as a female, as an inmate, as a female prison inmate, and she'll be involved in an episode that is going down. I believe it's the 20th episode, and which will probably be airing late April or May. This is Rousey's second TV guest appearance. She appeared in Drunk History last year, but obviously her resume's been pretty stacked with roles on various different movies, including Furious 7, Entourage, and, you know, others, The Expendables, in addition to that. So, I gotta say, it's good to see Ronda back in the public eye. I think that maybe this might be good for her, you know, just doing something small, TV. Maybe it'll be good, maybe not, who knows. I mean, for her to be involved in the character that they're saying she's gonna play, who's involved in, who knows how to fight and handle a weapon, I'm sure she's gonna be fighting the main character of the show, Jane, at some point, and that's what people are gonna tune in for. You know, Rousey for me is a talent that, whether her career is going to continue in MMA or whether she's going to go into pro wrestling or maybe go the movie route, the fact is that she definitely has that it factor that gets people's attention. So wherever she goes, people will follow. I mean, Gina Carano left the sport, it feels like ages ago. And, you know, she's been involved in a couple of films, some better than others, but she did hit it fairly big with her role in Deadpool, and that's sometimes all it takes. And she was good in that, man. I thought she did a really good job. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, for those of you looking to see Ronda Rousey possibly get her ass kicked on a TV show, you'll only have to wait until May to check it out. All right. That bit of MMA news is going to wrap things up for this week's MMA segment. Let us switch gears and jump into the week's wrestling news.
Yes, sir, we promised you a great main event here tonight. Look at that here. Andre, the giant WrestleMania. Everyone has a price. It's not over. Watching.
All right, let's get this ball rolling with this past Monday's Raw, which was surprisingly good. There were a lot of things I really enjoyed. The opening promo work from Kevin Owens was fucking stellar. It reminded me of his promo work during his feud with Sami Zayn. Just a lot more serious, a lot more darker, a bit of an edge. And I thought it was really good. I think they not only helped refresh Kevin Owens' character, but it also did a very good job in making people interested in his match with Goldberg at WWE Fastlane. I thought they did a good job with that. We had a number one contenders match with Enzo and Cass taking on Cesaro and Sheamus, which saw Enzo and Cass emerge the victors, and now the number one contenders to challenge Gallows and Anderson. It pains me to say it, man, and you know, I like to be entertained, but the Enzo and Cass shtick is getting really fucking tiresome. Even the crowd was kind of excited when, Cesaro, when Sheamus hit, Enzo, with the brogue kick. They were definitely into that. That's for sure. We got a handicap match with Anderson and Gallows taking on Roman Reigns. We had the New Day taking on Jinder Mahal and Rusev, which was, it was crazy, man. It was all right. It definitely was. I was, with regards to the Gallows and Anderson and Roman Reigns match, I was bummed with the way this match went down. I don't like sacrificing the heads of your division, in this case, your tag team champions, for the sake of giving Roman Reigns a little bit more juice. The setup for last week, I get it. I get what they tried to do, but regurgitating that once again for this week, and in the same instance, making them look weak, was definitely a step in the wrong direction. The New Day match with Jinder and handsome Rusev was funny. There were a lot of funny moments there, but the big thing was obviously continuing to build the hype for the New Day ice cream, and the reveal that the New Day were going to be your hosts for WrestleMania, which is a bit of a bummer for me personally. Just not having them involved in a match and giving them an awesome entrance is a little disheartening, but that may change. We had our contract signing with Neville and Gallagher, which we know was going to end as we would expect. Did a good job though for the most part, just making Gallagher look good and making him look strong also. It was fine. I had no problem with it. It's a shame though that at the end of it all, you know, the main attraction here is Neville, and probably Gallagher may at some point get a cruiserweight title reign, but right now it's all about Neville, and Gallagher is just a foil for him this time. We got a Nia Jax squash match, which nobody cares about. We had some Bayley promo work with Stephanie McMahon at her super heelish best. Definitely, I thought they did a decent job with it. I felt Stephanie definitely helped move it along, but then it just got bogged down with, you know, Sasha and Charlotte. We knew where it was going. Obviously the setup was Charlotte, Sasha Banks. Sasha got the win. You know, obviously Bayley was going to come in for the save to stop Dana Brooke, and pretty much that's what it was. You know, it was a decent match. I get it. I get where you're trying to go with this, with Charlotte being undefeated in pay-per-views. You want to keep Bayley strong, and you also want to build towards Sasha Banks' inevitable WrestleMania involvement. We already see it a mile away. We know it's going to be Nia. We know it's going to be Sasha. We know it's going to be Charlotte, and of course Bayley. The question is, will it be a fatal four-way? Will there be some sort of stipulation? Will Dana Brooke even get an opportunity? Who knows? But at the end of the day, you know, that you can see the booking a mile away. It wasn't terrible, but how many times are we going to use Sasha and Charlotte to get the crowd invested when, you know, it's something we've seen a dozen times already? It's fucked up. You know, it definitely is pretty fucked up in my opinion. We got a non-title match with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, which it was solid, man, but we all knew that the Samoa Joe attack was inevitable, and it definitely was. You know, just Kevin Owens being a monster. They did a good job with that. And I felt that there was some really good, good character development and possible foundations being set up for a stable with Joe and Kevin Owens and possibly Triple H. So there's definitely some cool stuff there. That's for sure. I thought, you know, I definitely see those seeds being planted. I did want to mention, obviously, there was a opening graphic for the passing of George the Animal Steele, which, you know, I was bummed to read that. I was also bummed to find out also about the passing of Ivan Koloff. It's just been a rough week for wrestling. Also, I had heard that, you know, Nicole Bass had passed away. Then I heard conflicting reports that she hadn't passed away, but that she was brain dead. Just tough, man. Really, really tough stuff. We had a really good Brock Lesnar, Paul Heyman segment. I know a lot of people weren't into it, but I thought they did a good job. Just Paul Heyman being Paul Heyman. Like, that's the only way to describe it. And Brock Lesnar just looking the part, which is fine. I think they did a good job with that. Our main event for Raw was Braun Strowman and The Big Show. I really thought it was going to be a completely piss poor shit show of a match, but it was a surprisingly well done big man match. You know, they worked the match very well, and it definitely looks like these guys did their homework. There was a lot of really good stuff from The Big Show. They definitely did a good job keeping him strong. And also Braun Strowman sold a lot of the stuff like a champ, which is good. I really thought that they did a good job. There was some small moments where things kind of fell apart, but they did a good job just keeping the pace going and saving what could have just been really, really bad. They did good. You know, they did a really, really good job. I thought that this was one of those moments where I felt the match was a passing of the torch for Braun Strowman. You know, he was booked well for the match. He looked good in the match, and The Big Show made him look aces, all while not, you know, completely jobbing out Show, which we already know he's probably, you know, his inevitable match with Shaq is bound to start taking shape sooner rather than later. And I think they did a good job. I thought, I like I said, when I read it, I was like, oh, we're going to see this shit as our main event. But they took their time. They really made it work as well as possible. And a lot of it probably is because they've done the match at house shows. They've been building towards it. I've heard a lot of stories about the Big Show. Ryback has actually told quite a few on his podcast, and that when the Big Show wants to sell your offense and bump for you, like, that's a big deal. That's something huge, especially because, his body isn't in the best shape that it was. And for him to eat so much of Braun's offense the way he did and look good doing it, I thought they did a good job. I definitely feel that was a high point. Now, this doesn't mean I want to see this match every week, but I thought, I definitely thought it was a good job. I also felt that Reigns hitting the ring and, getting pretty much drop kicked and sent packing was a good way to keep that momentum going. They did a good job. I thought it was really well done. That's for sure. On the SmackDown side of things, SmackDown, I was bummed because I had heard a lot of rumors, and obviously they were true, that Naomi was forced to vacate the title. They did a really good job, though, in terms of just creating some really compelling storytelling. Not sure, in my opinion, why they went with Becky Lynch there when they could have easily have given Mickie James the opportunity against Alexa Bliss, but I'm sure that they're crafting a different narrative for that. The end result was Alexa Bliss becoming now a 2-time SmackDown Women's Champion, which it's not terrible. I think Alexa Bliss has improved quite a bit. And we'll see what happens. It's a shame, though, with regards to Naomi. Turns out that she had injured her knee during the moonsault spot at the Elimination Chamber, according to the Wrestling Observer. And people thought that she would be able to be back in there this week, but it turns out that it was definitely more serious than expected. They're comparing it to the injury Seth Rollins recently suffered, where obviously she's going to be on the shelf not too long, but her WrestleMania timeline is definitely questionable. We had an American Alpha squash match with Fandango and Tyler Breeze. It was okay. I know where they're going, though. Obviously, the Usos continue to play the head games. They did a good job with that. I thought that was solid. The Falls Count Anywhere match with Nikki and Natalya was a lot better in my eyes than I thought it was going to be. I mean, compared to their pay-per-view match, you could say it was fucking 5 stars, but it was good. They really had good energy there. The Maurice involvement, while surprising, I've been talking about the rumors that we're gonna have a mixed tag match at WrestleMania with John Cena and Nikki Bella against Miz and Maurice, and this ending definitely kind of added fuel to that fire. The match itself was good. They did a good job with it. They also, like I said, it was good cohesive storytelling, riding the momentum that was started at the Elimination Chamber with the little backstage segment there. Overall, not the best match of the night by any stretch, but definitely a lot better than what I've seen from the two of them. We had our battle royal at the end of the night. The winner was going to face Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania. John Cena, AJ, The Miz, Luke Harper, Baron Corbin, Dolph Ziggler, Apollo Crews, Kalisto, Mojo, and Dean Ambrose. Overall, the match was pretty good. A nice little battle royal action there. They set up a lot of things here. We saw the continued development of the feud between Ambrose and Corbin, which, again, very good. Obviously, we're starting to see the seeds being planted for The Miz and John Cena, where The Miz was eliminated, jumps back in and tosses Cena. Cena, as a result, gets eliminated. It was really good. I also like the ending, the way it went down with Harper and Styles being eliminated at the same time. And now, obviously, we get a match to crown a number one contender next week. I thought it was good. I thought that they really did a solid job putting all the pieces together for all of the WrestleMania moments, or the WrestleMania matches for the SmackDown brand. Definitely a lot of build there. And the beauty of it is that SmackDown doesn't even have the pressure of another pay-per-view. Like Raw kind of has to step it up because they got to do Fastlane, and then from Fastlane it's right into building the momentum from that pay-per-view into WrestleMania. I feel that in SmackDown's case, they're in the driver's seat as a brand because a lot of those pressures are off their shoulders. Now they could just focus on good TV every week all the way up to WrestleMania. I think we got 4 or 5 SmackDowns between now and Mania, and like I said, just no pressure and just really, really good storytelling. While Raw was really good this week, I felt SmackDown hit it out of the park, putting all their little pieces together for what is shaping up to be a very solid WrestleMania for the blue brand. But we'll see what happens next week. On the 205 Live side, obviously we're building towards the big match of Fastlane with Neville and Jack Gallagher. We had a good match between Brian Kendrick and Akira Tozawa. I just, I kind of felt that they shouldn't have gone with they should have kind of dragged that match out a little bit more with interference and everything. Giving people the match so quickly kind of takes away any luster of when the match officially goes down. But, it is what it is. We had a good Mustafa Ali, Noam Dar match. I know some people weren't too into the match. Obviously, Mustafa Ali is going to come in, do a lot of his great high flying spots. Noam Dar, though, he brings really good heel heat. People just he's made himself such a hateable character and such an annoying character that he's really thriving in that environment. And some people feel that that's what's made his character so compelling, the fact that he's just an annoying little douchebag, but that he doesn't really bring any real wrestling to the table. And I don't think that's the case. I feel that Noam Dar's just been working the WWE style compared to what we've seen from him on the Independents or in the Cruiserweight Classic. And I think it's fine. I mean, Mustafa Ali was more than capable of delivering in terms of any sort of high flying acrobatics. And that's the case. Definitely. The only problem is that Noam Dar, he's so caught up in playing the douchebag that he's not really as energetic or intense as he should be. It's pretty much kind of just coasting along, playing the cocky prick instead of really fine tuning the villainy that his character is supposed to have. It's a shame too, because where Noam Dar is failing is where Neville is thriving. Neville got repackaged. He came back. He's just super aggressive, super intense, and it works. And I think that Noam Dar should be on a similar level, just super intense, but cocky. It should be a combination of the two. It's just that they're just riding that wave of, he's our cocky heel, that they're not finding ways to truly make him a better performer in that respect. His wrestling for me is fine. I just feel his character needs more fine tuning. And Mustafa Ali, the crowd is into the character. You haven't had to rely on the racial tropes to get him over, and to see him just not being utilized more so is unfortunate. Also very excited to see that Austin Aries is back. And, I think that's huge. Obviously, I felt that it was a nice touch. Austin Aries announcing his own video package. And, it was good, man. It was good to see that. It's going to be good for 205 Live, and to see a guy like Austin Aries in there, it's a great addition to the show. Again, I just feel 205 Live would thrive better at Full Sail and not on the road. That's just me. Our main event on 205 Live, Jack Gallagher, Tony Nese. Very, very good match. Good work from both guys. Nese doing some awesome work as always. Gallagher continues to not only improve, but just continue to get the fans, really behind all his shenanigans. And that's all that matters. Tony Nese is, 2 or 3 matches away from being a guy that could be vying for a title. Too many people are caught up in, the fact that he's jacked and he has a very Neville-ish look to him. But Tony Nese is a capable performer. As somebody who's watched wrestling here in New York on the Independents, I've seen Tony Nese's work. And, WWE's only just beginning to scratch the surface. I think Nese has the tools and the look to be a big threat in the Cruiserweight division. And I'm only hoping that they start utilizing his talents sooner rather than later, because by then the ship will have sailed, and when they finally decide to invest in him, nobody will give a shit. But overall, the match was good. Gallagher got a really good push from a guy who, stylistically and physically is very similar to Neville, which is always a plus. And Nese looks good, he looked good. Even losing, he looks good. So that's something to keep an eye on. No Drew Gulak sighting this week, but you know, who knows? Maybe we'll see him next week. All right, let's jump into the wrestling news. The interesting thing that a lot of people were talking about and sharing on Facebook this week was a match from TNA Impact. My Impact is backlog is a couple of episodes in, but people were sending me this on Facebook, and there's an episode of Impact where a referee is blurred out, and that was, you know, the Hardys went to Crash to take on Super Crazy and Psychosis, and Impact Wrestling showed the match. But the funny thing is they had to blur out the referee because Lucha Underground sent TNA a cease and desist because the referee is under contract with them, which is fucking bonkers. Everybody was sending me like screenshots and shit. So if you watch TNA Impact and you wonder why the ref has been blurred out, ladies and gents, that's it. And if you haven't watched it, you can probably check it out on the Impact YouTube channel or see if they do an Impact replay, and you can check it out there. But it was pretty hilarious. I looked, you know, and I'm like, what are all these messages? And people are like, yo, did you see TNA this week? And I'm like, shit, I haven't. And it was like the ref just blurred out. It was crazy. It definitely was really, really crazy. You know, as I mentioned during the Raw recap, you know, the passing of George the Animal Steele was truly unfortunate, you know, at 79 years of age. I had seen a message from our friend Mike Kingston, who does Headlocked, referencing that George the Animal Steele was in, you know, some bad, it was in a bad way with regards to his health. And shortly after I read that, you know, I saw that he had passed, and I was bummed. You know, I remember the days of George the Animal Steele just biting the turnbuckle and chasing Miss Elizabeth and just being one of those guys that nobody could ever forget. It's like, hey, George the Animal Steele, yeah, man, that was the guy that bit the turnbuckles. Like it was always very easy to put that correlation together. And you know, I was bummed to hear it. Also, the passing of Ivan Koloff, which I mentioned, was also talked about. He was actually battling liver cancer, I ended up finding out, and obviously he ended up losing that battle, but it was unfortunate. And like I said, Nicole Bass had been having a ton of health problems. I believe she had a stroke, and then she ended up being brain dead, which is what I last heard. And obviously I still haven't had official confirmation. From what many wrestling outlets have reported is that her companion had reported that she had passed away. And then obviously a little more research turns out that she was brain dead, and that they had made the decision, I believe, to remove her off life support, but that her companion released the fact that she passed away because she was, you know, declared brain dead, which again, you know, my heart goes out to the families of all these individuals for, you know, having to go through this stuff, man. It's never easy, you know, burying a loved one or dealing with the passing of a loved one, especially those whose loved ones have been in the public eye, because there's always constant reminders. I mean, for George the Animal Steele, he's everywhere. He's one of those guys that people are always going to talk about matches, especially on the network. Same thing with Ivan Koloff. With Nicole Bass, it's a little different for different reasons, but still, you know, she was a performer that was active for quite some time, and it's again just unfortunate. Also mentioned on Raw this week, and I don't believe I mentioned it when I was going through the Raw recap, was the announcement that DDP was going to be joining the 2017 Hall of Fame class, joining Kurt Angle, Teddy Long, and the Rock and Roll Express. I feel it's an honor that's well deserved. DDP is a guy who's been in the business for a long time. Came into the business at a very late stage in his life, and went from being the guy that just came in to being the guy that took over. I mean, this is a guy who absorbed wrestling like a sponge and worked his ass off. He was the first guy in the ring and the last guy out of the ring. And if you want to hear a really good interview with Diamond Dallas Page, he stopped by Jason Ferrugia's Renegade Radio podcast. Jason Ferrugia was a guest on MTR Behind the Mic, and a guy who I'm a huge fan of. I actually enjoy Renegade Radio quite a bit. And the interview that he had with Jason was tremendous. I'm going to try and link to that in the show notes for this episode, because it was really good, and it gave so many great stories from, you know, DDP gave so many great stories just from all the different people that helped him get to, you know, the various stages in his career. And I think it's an honor that's well deserved. I mean, he's one of those guys, when you talk about WCW, yeah, you could talk about Ric Flair, you could talk about all that, but WCW through and through, definitely Diamond Dallas Page, Sting, those guys were WCW products. Booker T, those were the guys that cut their teeth in WCW. And yeah, they got over in WCW and they stayed over in WWE, but the big break came for them during the Attitude Era in WCW. And like I said, DDP definitely is deserving of that induction. So the other crazy news story was The Rock getting himself into some hot water. It seems during this past Monday's Raw, they were filming the Fighting with My Family film, which is the film I had talked about that The Rock's production company is doing based on the life of Paige and her family. So, The Rock was out there and he was trying to get the fans to stay to be in the crowd for the filming of some scenes. And he said that he was going to get CM Punk on the phone. And I can imagine WWE was not happy, which a lot of outlets are actually reporting that they weren't. He ended up calling CM Punk on FaceTime. CM Punk did not respond, but did acknowledge it on Twitter. The crowd was really into it. And it was crazy because, PW Insider had reported that they tried to have The Rock go in a different direction, et cetera, et cetera. It was insane, man. It was really, really crazy that The Rock would do that. And I'm sure The Rock got himself into a little trouble for it, but I'm sure it's nothing compared to what if it were someone else. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure he got a stern talking to from Vince, but the fuck are you going to do? It's The Rock. He doesn't need to do this shit, but he does. It was interesting. When I read that, I was like, wow, imagine if CM Punk would have answered the phone. That would have been bananas, but still pretty cool nonetheless for the Rock to do something like that. On the TNA side of things, we know that a lot of wrestlers were performing without contracts still, Drew Galloway and the Hardys in particular, but two performers that have re-signed with TNA are Mike and Maria Bennett. Of course, Mike Bennett came into TNA from Ring of Honor with his wife, Maria Kanellis Bennett, and they've been there, since January and have been working with various different performers in the company, and they are now officially re-signed. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what they do with them. I like Mike Bennett. I feel that he has potential, but I just don't feel that his potential is going to be maximized in TNA, at least in my opinion. That's for sure. Last but not least, we had talked about a couple of months back that we were going to be getting a series based on Glow, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, on Netflix. Well, it looks like the series will be scheduled to debut on March 31st on Netflix, and they're also going to allegedly get some original episodes from the original series as well. That's what I've been hearing. Don't quote me on it. It's something I've been hearing. I've been hearing that we're going to get the new Glow series, but we're also going to allegedly get some of the old stuff as well. We'll see what happens. The new series is scheduled to debut on Netflix March 31st with 10 episodes of the first season being available that day, which is pretty awesome. So we'll see what happens with that. A lot of people have been interested in the interesting change that happened at WWE's upcoming Madison Square Garden house show. The arena had updated the card for the March 12th show, and replacing Naomi at that event is going to be NXT Women's Champion Asuka, who will now be involved in the 8-woman tag match alongside Nikki Bella and Becky Lynch, and Tamina, who is coming back as a face, it looks like, taking on Alexa Bliss, Mickie James, Natalya, and Carmella. So perhaps a little foreshadowing, perhaps just somebody stepping in for an injured superstar, but a lot of people are excited that Asuka is going to be involved in this WWE house show at Madison Square Garden. If you're a New York resident and want to attend, mark it down, March 12th at MSG. All right. I think that is the last bit of wrestling news for this weekend. It is also the end of this week's show. So I've given you guys my take on MMA and wrestling. As always, I'd love to hear yours. Feel free to reach out via social media. You can find My Take Radio on Twitter at My Take Radio. The rest of our social media presence can be found via Rageworks, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, of course, Google Plus, Pinterest, Snapchat. Those links will be in the show notes for this episode. I invite all of you, as always, to join our Facebook group and interact with myself and the rest of the Rageworks team, talking wrestling, MMA, video games, entertainment, tech, and anything else that comes our way. It's a good way to interact and just get a closer bond with our listeners and readers. So if you haven't, visit the Rageworks group on Facebook. Links for that will also be in the show notes. All right. I want to thank all of you for enjoying. Well, it's up to you if you enjoyed it, but for checking out this week's MMA and wrestling edition. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment and give us a rating on Stitcher or iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And it's always nice to see that you guys are checking our stuff out. So again, take a moment, rate us on iTunes or Stitcher, whether it's my show, My Take Radio, or The Variant Issue, or any of the other shows on the Rageworks Network. I know the hosts would definitely love to hear from you guys. All right, guys, keep it locked here this week for the Gaming and Entertainment edition of MTR, and make sure to join us March 1st at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, 8:30 p.m. Pacific for the live MMA and wrestling edition of My Take Radio, which just so happens to be episode 400. Thank you guys for listening. Peace. My Take Radio is part of the Rageworks Podcast Network, giving you the best rants about gaming, entertainment, and the works. To find out more, visit us at rageworks.net.